Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, Caitlin.
Okay, so the case study we are doing is Elizabeth, and she is bringing a lot to the table for us. So, I guess let's just start wrapping our mind around, her background, symptoms, just her daily living, things like that, so we can get on the same page.
Yep.
So Elizabeth goes to school, on campus. She's at a four-year college. Um, she comes from an Asian American background.
Yep.
Um, it says that she wants to meet friends. So she's attempting, to reach out and figure out how to meet friends at school.
Yeah. And this is also
Um,
her first semester too, which is important to note.
yeah, yeah, because she's still trying to, be in that transition phase where she's knowing the campus and knowing her classes and trying to get supports on the school grounds.
Right.
Okay.
Um,
What's
she does come from an Asian American household. Um, and like you were leading into with her trying to socialize, she finds communication with a friend or a classmate, I guess you could say, which is really where her trauma, I think, becomes apparent in her life to the point where it's, interfering with her daily living, but then, all of her past trauma also kind of builds up on top of that. Um,
Yeah.
and then, there's, I guess you could kind of say miscommunication, but she went in, just expecting to socialize, meet a classmate, work on homework, and it ended up with her being raped by this classmate, unfortunately, which just, I think, just kind of triggered her into like kind of a spiral, I'd say. Um,
Yeah. The past trauma comes to light
yeah.
following this event.
Um, and which leads into her being, depressed and having many maladaptive and adaptive responses of, suicidal ideation, poor sleep, feeling guilty, and then her grades begin to drop. She has a fear of becoming addicted to medication. So just like a loss of interest in just pretty much everything and kind of feels, I'd say, probably lonely, hopeless, things like that. Do you want
Mm-hmm.
to touch on a little bit about like her childhood and things like that?
Yeah, well, the case study said there was a lot of events that shows a lot of different transitional phases. Like, she was living with her maternal grandparents, and her mom recently got remarried, and she feels like her mom, loves her brand new baby child more than she loves Elizabeth. Um, Her grandmother's home was so unstable. The case study talked about how the grandmother was even very racist, and using, racist slurs, that the home was a very narcissistic environment. Um, and so like all those like unstable, home environments is just, you know, you can tell it's coming to light right now because there is no stable support shown.
Right.
Have that go-to person. And I think she really was seeking to have that, love and belonging need met from her mother. So I
I
think we're
think that's
starting to,
also kind of why she wanted to probably go into school with the intention of kind of, I'd say, breaking that cycle, being able to reach out and find supports, whether it's from faculty or from her peers and things like that, and kind of having some form of support, which she never got before. And then it's also important to note the reason for her like living with her maternal grandparents, like her father committed suicide when she was very young. But another trauma to that, on top of that, is that she wasn't even told the circumstances of his death until way later in her life. Um,
Mhm.
and then her grandparents were trying to take the Social Security money that Elizabeth and her sister were getting from the death of her father.
Yeah.
So it almost just seemed like Elizabeth never really had time to come to terms with the loss of her father. And instead, it just kind
Mhm.
of seemed like a financial stability for her grandparents. Like it wasn't like what how does Elizabeth feel? It's like, oh, Elizabeth is getting a lump sum of money. That's what's most important.
Yeah. And I'm glad you made a comment about the father's suicide, because that's actually important to make a note of, with um generational like diagnoses, is Elizabeth suffering from um a diagnosis? You know, is there something there that she should have been treated for? And she's even experiencing suicidal ideations now. So does make you question, how long she's been feeling like that, and is there an untreated diagnosis that she's dealing with?
Yeah.
So I was glad you said that. Um, so with all her symptoms, I mean, you started talking about the maladaptive and adaptive symptoms. There's like a ton of them. And I think we found, how you said, like there was the behavioral issues, because obviously now she's having legal issues. So we're seeing like a lot of negative thinking errors. She's having sleep disturbances, eating disturbances, and those are all criteria for, certain diagnoses. Were you picking up any of that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really leans into, obviously she's very depressed, and I think a lot of this low level of energy and just the fact that she is not enjoying life anymore, and she doesn't have any support to talk about it emotionally or anything like that. And I mean, in the research and in the case study too, and so I agree with it, but I think she definitely meets the criteria to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, gosh, we keep saying the same things, but I mean, just the negative self-talk alone, how she's feeling about herself, how she's allowing goals that she had. She had that personal goal of having good grades academically, and now she's just allowing, you know, um, that to slip. And she seems to be in a really big slump right now, unmotivated, unhappy, obviously. But we're also seeing in the case study that she has intense anger now, especially directed towards the man who raped her. So she's feeling a lot of things while also being, you know, unmotivated, and how to deal with things.
Right. I think it's
So,
important to note too from her family, like it's not surprising to see the way that she is approaching all of the situations that she's been dealt with, and the inability to like regulate her emotions, because we can see that from the case study that she was never given the proper tools or setup in her childhood to understand that, these emotions
mhm,
are okay and they're expected, and this is how we can appropriately deal with them. So she was set up with nothing in that realm for her to be able to, self-soothe or come up with coping skills or things like that. So I think it's not surprising that she is behaving the way that she is. It's sad, but I think she just lacked all
yeah.
sorts of supports growing up.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point that you brought up about like just her culture alone, like the background of that, that, oh, this is like hush hush, or, you know, you shouldn't be acting like that. You shouldn't be feeling this way. Women don't act like that. Um, and, suppressing those things that she's feeling, or feeling like she shouldn't, you know, have those feelings. There's a lot of invalidation. And that's, how we said before, it's really critical that she gets those natural supports. Um, and be more aware of, how her culture has influenced her, you know, her beliefs, her behavioral patterns, her thought process. We really need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Okay, so you were talking about Elizabeth definitely meets the criteria for major
Right.
depressive disorder. Do you know what criteria she does meet?
So, according to the DSM-5, the current up-to-date version, we utilize that a little bit just to, see if the case study was correct in her diagnosis, just because she kind of meets criteria for a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But to be diagnosed with MDD, you need to meet five, and she met eight. Out of those eight, we see depressed mood, sleep disturbances, loss of interest, guilt, decreased energy, diminished concentration, appetite changes, and suicidal ideation. And I believe the ninth one was like psychomotor, something like that. But
Yeah.
her mental state didn't decrease, just that energy and concentration did. So that's why we went with 8 out of the 9.
Okay. Yeah, and it's like I know the case study said that she was delayed in, getting mental health services. So it kind of makes me question how much she was affected in her early childhood, but she either suppressed it or allowed time to go by, and kind of just dealt on her own the best she could.
Right.
Um, so looking into her past would be interesting, to see how she managed, how you said the father's suicide and living in a narcissistic home. Be curious to see how Elizabeth dealt with that on
Yeah.
her own.
I think that's why we're seeing all of this resurface now, is because it's never been dealt with in an appropriate manner before. So she's been repressing all of these things for all this time. So, like I previously said, it's not surprising that it's all coming to light all at this time. Because if she would have been, given the proper tools and resources before, maybe she wouldn't be so hung up on, like, she would come to an acceptance with, her
Mhm.
childhood and her father passing and things like that. But she was never given the tools to do that. So,
Or even having the friend to talk to about it, like she's at the point where she was literally looking for a friend.
right,
Um, and I think if she did have a positive friend, positive support system, they could have been like, hey, I think you maybe need to check in to get
right.
some therapy services.
Yeah. And it's important to note too, with the fact that she attempted to make a friend and backfired horribly, unfortunately. But also it's important to note, and I think it was kind of overshadowed. It like was talked about very briefly in the case study, but I think it was overshadowed too
Uh,
quickly. But her rape resulted in a pregnancy. And I don't think, just the way the case study said, like, she didn't really have anybody. Like, I think it said she didn't tell her family or anything like that. And then, she ended up getting an abortion out of that too. So the fact that she could have potentially become a mother and having to deal with that on her own, like, unbelievable. So,
And even doing the abortion on her own, having to go through that,
right.
that itself can be very traumatic and, uh, a huge burden almost, like how do I live with myself, or is this accepting in my culture that I did this, or
Yeah.
what will other people think of me? And, I feel like all of these things, how you said, are collectively, resurfacing. It's almost like doubting, like, oh man, should I look into getting a friend? Because now I have all this stuff, then maybe I'm going to get judged. And my culture and my family, they already, have this, and this I have to follow and meet. So I feel like she's getting forced into having to meet all this criteria just to have a friend. And then being afraid to being judged when she does get a friend.
For sure. I think that's why it's important that she sought out therapy, because even if it's not necessarily a personal friend, but just having somebody to vent to and actually,
Mhm.
say what has been going on and like say it out loud and just making everything
Right?
sound real, I think is
Hmm.
important that she, sought
Yeah.
therapy.
She needs that non-judgmental environment where someone will validate her feelings, someone will help her be self-aware of what she is feeling, things that have triggered her, symptoms that are appearing, and just process and work through them because, she's never had that opportunity before.
Right.
Um,
Um, do you want to touch on our treatment plan ideas, the 5 ones that we came up with for her?
yes. Well, for starters, we definitely have to get the legal issues under, you know,
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the legal issues just a little bit?
yeah, I mean, she has theft charges. It's coming from basically credit card fraud. She was racking up all these bills, and running credit card charges at her place of employment and thinking that this was her money. And there was, you know, it could have been, maybe a culture thing where she didn't understand how things are done. Or it could just have been like a thinking, or maybe like she was getting overstimulated, overwhelmed with what recently happened, and she's just at the, oh, well.